colleagues, we are ready to start, not to waste time. As you can see, we have quite an intensive agenda, lots of beautiful speakers. So we would like, to the maximum extent possible, use the expert potential available here today. My name is Ірина Сушко. I am the team leader and key expert of the funded by Renaissance Foundation Fund, and I'm the organizer of this event together with the coordination of the European Atlantic integration and the Ukraine-EU platform. Our today's event is a press conference in the format of public discussion. It's called the conclusions of the Council of Association Ukraine-EU Euro-integration agenda for 2019. Everyone present here today probably is aware that 2 days ago we had the meeting of the Council of Association, at which traditionally we concluded the annual results in the progress of meeting the requirements of the association agreement, as well as identified those areas where Ukraine should move forward in further integration to the internal markets of Europe, and some other positive news that hopefully our today's speakers will share with us in the first part. In the second part, we'll talk about the second information reason, those blue books that we handed out to you. This is the point of view of the civil society as to where we need to integrate next year to finally achieve the breakthrough in the areas where we can actually achieve more than we did so far. So today we'll talk to the authors of this survey, with the government officials who are responsible for the relevant topics. Hopefully, as a result of this discussion, we'll obtain a better understanding where exactly we can achieve a breakthrough, where to focus our efforts in the upcoming year. And we'll like to start with Ivana Klимпуш-Цинцадze's video conference. Let's check on the technical ability to connect with her in Brussels. She was being involved with European integration before. Now she is on the Ukraine NATO integration summit. So hopefully she will tell us about the agreements reached on the 17th of December. That was only 1 day of discussions, but actually, but in order to achieve some agreements in 1 day, we need to have some better. You can hear me, you cannot see me. Okay. It's a pleasure to see you from Brussels, because you need to work some more on the NATO integration. Thank you, Ms. Ivana. We are here to discuss European integration, and we would like to hear from you as an eyewitness whether you were satisfied or not with the agreements that were achieved, what assessment the European counterparts gave us as to the implementation of the association agreement. This is a conclusion of the annual effort for you and your colleagues.
Враження від цього всього, з яким настроєм ви дивитеся?
What is your mood? Esteemed colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to have the ability to talk to you about the conclusions, what we managed to achieve and probably what we failed to achieve during the conclusions of this Council of Association meeting. Actually, we discussed the political and economic agenda and roadmap between Ukraine and the European Union over the last years. This is the 5th meeting of the Council of Association, so I would like to thank the European Union, first of all, for the political support that Ukraine continues to receive. There is a clear understanding of the need to support the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country. There is also a clear understanding and actually criticism of the actions of the Russian Federation that they performed in Azov and Black Seas against Ukrainian vessels and sailors, and the need to bring our captured military personnel back home to Ukraine, as well as vessels, of course. So this political support for us is extremely important, and it's important that the world recognizes that Ukraine operates within the international law boundaries, while the Russian Federation violates it in all possible and impossible ways, starting with violation of international conventions and bilateral agreements, and it just behaves brutally. Another more broad area that this council discussed is our economic cooperation, economic synergy. Goes without saying that in 2018 Ukraine did a lot in order to identify its priorities in terms of the economic integration, and our priorities have been reflected in the 20 summits declaration attended by the European Council, European Commission, and the President of Ukraine. And these are the priorities in the energy industry, in digital markets, in customs policy, technical regulations. They also justice and security sector. And we did everything possible to activate the dialogue along those lines and reach the agreements at the Council of Association level to deepen Ukraine's further integration in those 4 priority areas without losing momentum, instead speeding up the implementation of the requirements of the association agreement. Also, we clearly acknowledge that the European Union requires us not to lose momentum next year when the election campaign starts, both for presidential and parliamentary elections. We recognize the challenges we have, but it's important that during the elections to the European Parliament, when the European Commission membership will be changed, there would also be reached a clear understanding of how the European Union would continue its cooperation with Ukraine. These are the challenges that are for all of the counterparts, and we need just to manage to achieve them. We reached the understanding and agreements with the EU that in certain spheres we need to update the annexes and amendments to the association agreements. The European laws keep evolving, and Ukraine is ready to deepen its implementation of the commitments to maximum extent integrate to the European markets. So in principle we reached agreement that we will identify the further mechanism how we could move forward in updating 27th annex on energy. This is a key principal issue for us. It's important for us that after we conduct all reforms in Ukraine, we will be able to achieve such attitude towards Ukraine that becomes part and parcel of the European domestic internal market. But this will require efforts from governments, legislatures, businesses, civil society, and Verkhovna Rada, Parliament, of course. It's important for us that they acknowledge all the work that has been done by us to update our commitments to integrate to digital markets. The Council of Association obviously identified our interest in this area and focused its attention on this area as well. frankly speaking, I cannot say that this proved to be an ideal formula, but we'll keep working and we'll keep trying to promote the agenda that Ukraine proposed. We prepared a comprehensive, well thought through roadmap for integration to digital market, and we'll keep working with our European colleagues on the sector of justice and security. It's important for us to move towards the exact areas where we will be further working on ensuring cyber security, countering cyber threats, counteracting disinformation, building up joint management of borders. Here is a huge work ahead of us, which will require mobilization of efforts on the Ukrainian side, but also the involvement of the European counterparts on the customs and on the technical regulations. Well, in customs area, we clearly understand what needs to be achieved. There are a couple of tasks that have been reviewed for a couple of years by Parliament. So far, hopefully, MPs will be ready to pass the law, which is now draft law, on authorized economic operators, and then we can move more seriously in our joint work from the standpoint of reducing and demolishing those barriers that still exist in our customs cooperation. Obviously, here we respect that the proclaimed reform of the state fiscal service, by breaking it down into tax administration and customs service and focusing on the reform of the customs components, will yield needed results. We continue the discussion on the exhaustive list of requirements from the EU on how to start negotiations to reach an agreement on ACCA, and hopefully in this regard our Ministry of Economic Development and Trade would also have to join efforts. Only then we can expect positive results in our cooperation with European colleagues and the Ukrainian Parliament. I'll stop here. Probably we'll have some questions, and I'm ready to entertain them, if any. Thank you, Ms. Ivana. We're definitely not wasting any time at all. Thank you for this overview. Well, and most likely we are not able to keep Ms. Ivana online for a long time. So, Ms. Ivana, I'm from Ukraine Forum. You said that there is a need to update certain annexes and amendments to the association agreement. So in addition to energy sphere, where else? And what's the mechanism of updating annexes? First of all, it's the Annex 17 digital markets. When we've finalized our negotiations with the association agreement, at that time the EU was poorly regulating the digital market sphere, but we are evolving so fast that we are ready for more commitments to harmonize our legislation with the EU. We have updated certain annexes with the EU already, introduced certain changes, so for all of them there are separate procedures, and obviously this will require us a more fruitful work with our parliament. For instance, In terms of the ACCA agreement, it's clearly stated in the agreement itself that this annex will be updated, number 3 if I'm not mistaken, which stipulates, for instance, the update in compliance with the changes in the European legislation. And so the Ministry of Justice will help us to come up with a proper procedure as soon as we finalize our understanding with the EU on our joint efforts. Will you have any further questions? I would like to add one more thing. I saw the beginning of your discussion. It would be interesting for me to learn about the second part of your discussion today, the point of view of the civil society on the progress on meeting the commitments of the association agreement. So your findings, your proposals will help us to identify joint common tasks. Ms. Elena, can you tell us how far did you go in negotiations on Annex 27, on introducing changes there? I can see Ms. Olga Stefanishina and Mr. Kachka, those whom I see on my screen. They were instrumental and directly involved in 2 or 3 day detailed discussions with the colleagues from the EU on coming up with a mechanism of updating this annex, on agreeing on all the details of those changes. So hopefully they will share those details with you, because that was quite a voluminous work done with lots of technical tasks that we have to perform, but also with a huge number of political decisions that we have to make. And we expect that there will be a needed partnership, a positive pressure, if I may say so, from the civil society, so that the government and the parliament will meet their own obligations and commitments. Ms. Ivana, once again, thank you for joining us here today. We'll work together. We'll share the results of our survey with you, of course, which might cause more detailed discussions along the concrete priority spheres. Thank you, and I wish fruitful work and discussion, and I keep working here in Brussels. Good luck to you. Thank you. Well, and now we move to the European counterparts, and I will give floor to Mr. Hugh Мінгареллі, His Excellency, the Ambassador of the European Union in Ukraine, to present his understanding of the agreements that have been reached. Which are the priorities from your point of view have been identified for the upcoming year? What are those spheres where extra efforts need to be introduced, where Ukraine can obtain greater progress, even though the next year will be quite difficult because of the elections and all the populism that will follow, the increased threat of tension with the Russian Federation and such. So, anyway, what are the positive changes that the upcoming year will bring to us?
Thank you for inviting me to this collective discussion. I will just tell you what I have heard during this Association Council meeting. I will not give you interpretation, but facts. Alors, the meeting started with a restricted session. In the restricted session, there was on the EU side the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, who is as well a Vice President of the Commission, plus the Vice President of the Commission in charge of the Energy Union, and the Commissioner in charge of Enlargement and Neighborhood. And the discussion started with the situation in the Azov Sea. On the EU side, the High Representative stated that Ukraine can count on the EU support to face this new challenge. She stressed the fact that sanctions against Russia for the illegal annexation of Crimea and the conflict in Donbass were extended the week before, and that new sanctions against 9 people involved in the so-called election in the so-called Lugansk and Donetsk People Republic were adopted the week before. She explained that she met the Russian foreign minister in Milano at the OSCE ministerial, and that she sent a clear and strong message to him about how the EU feels on this Russian aggression in the Azov Sea. She stressed the fact that the European Parliament as well had taken a very clear position, and had, by the way, a few days before, granted the Sakharov Prize to Oleg Sentsov. She mentioned the fact that instruction had been given to the External Action Service and some Commission's offices to mobilize additional means to help economically and socially the Azov region affected by the new Russian aggression. She congratulated Ukraine for the extension of the special status law and the adoption on a new law on mine action by the Verkhovna Rada a few days before. The Vice President in charge of energy stressed the need for Ukraine to move ahead with unbundling of Naftogaz, unbundling of the electricity distribution company, the need to strengthen the independence of the nuclear safety regulator. There are frustrations from many people about this. The need to improve the transparency in gas distribution, and the need to reform the PSO, Public Service Obligation, which is not today in the right shape. He explained that an agreement had been found to update the association agreement annexes on energy to reflect the development of the EU acquis over the last few years, and he explained that he had put forward a new proposal to have trilateral negotiation with Russia and Ukraine on a new gas transit contract in mid-January. The commissioner in charge of the enlargement and the neighborhood insisted on the fact that a reflection started in the Commission on what can be done to strengthen economically the Azov Sea region. He underlines the fact that the second tranche of our macro-financial assistance, 500 million euros, could be disbursed as from next spring, provided Ukraine meet the necessary conditions. And he stressed the fact that the issue of non-performing loans should be addressed as soon as possible. These were the main issues which were raised during the restricted session. During the plenary meeting, the High Representative underlined our continued commitment to political association and economic integration. She stressed the fact that the recent update of the Government Rada roadmap for the implementation of the association agreement was an important step. She underlined that the various subcommittees which have been set up in the framework of this association agreement should be better used to monitor the implementation of this agreement. And I insist on that because I have been at my modest level telling this for months now. We have set up, as you know, various subcommittees. And in these committees, the experts of the various sectors meet, and it is up to them to carry out the technical work, to monitor the implementation of this agreement. The High Representative stressed as well that a joint monitoring of the implementation of this agreement was important. She welcomed the ambition of Ukraine to deepen sectoral cooperation in a number of sectors, and she mentioned digital market, customs cooperation, and energy. She highlighted the fact that we have already started work on our side to update Annex 27 of the Association Agreement on energy. She welcomes the approval in the first reading of the draft electoral code and the appointment of the new members of the Central Electoral Commission. She stressed the fact that it will be important to ensure full electoral rights of all IDPs. She looked forward to the free and fair conduct of next year's presidential and parliamentary election. She welcomes the convening of local election in the newly amalgamated communities. She reconfirmed the importance of strengthening our cooperation to help Ukraine face hybrid threats. She stressed the fact that the civil society and the media play a crucial role in Ukraine's democratic transformation, and therefore she said that additional efforts are needed to protect civil society activists and journalists against violent attacks. She called on the Ukrainian authorities to step up the protection of civil society activists. She expressed the hope that line ministries, the Rada, the Ombudsperson and civil society will continue their commitment to the implementation of Human Rights Action Plan. She recalled Ukraine's commitment to ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminality Court. She was happy to commend the Ukrainian government for the progress in the area of gender equality policies. But she reiterated the EU call to swiftly ratify the Istanbul Convention. She recalled the agreement in the joint statement of our last summit with regard to Ukrainian law on education, on the need to ensure the respect for the right of minorities. She called on the Ukrainian side to fully implement the recommendation included in the opinion of the Venice Commission in this regard. She raised the issue of the new law on state language policy, and here she recalled her suggestion to seek the opinion of the Venice Commission before the entry into force of this new law. She stressed the need to ensure the effective provision of social benefits and services, including pensions, to all IDPs, regardless of their place of residence. She welcomes the progress made in decentralization in general and the impressive progress in the voluntary amalgamation of local communities. She recalled that the EU and European financial institutions had mobilized over 12 billion euro over the last 4 years. She recalled that this year's annual action program funded with the ENI focused on investment in the economy as well as in people, with a 54 million euro program to promote energy efficiency, a 38 million euro program to boost vocational education and training and people-to-people contacts, and a dedicated 5 million euro envelope for Erasmus+. She mentioned as well that in addition to this bilateral assistance, the new European External Investment Plan provides for further substantial opportunities for leveraging private sector resources, and she encouraged Ukraine to take full advantage of this instrument. In the field of justice, freedom and security, she welcomes Ukrainian interest in intensifying cooperation in the area of justice and home affairs. She mentioned that the EU is ready to cooperate on the effective implementation of integrated border management, national asylum systems and biometrics-based identity management. She stressed the fact that we are ready to support this goal through a joint survey project by the European Commission and the World Bank. She recalled the importance of ongoing reforms in the area of the fight against corruption. In this regard, she called on Ukraine to ensure adequate financing and independence for the new anti-corruption institution. She welcomed the adoption of the necessary law for establishing this new anti-corruption court, and she expressed the wish that this court can be operational as quickly as possible. She expressed the hope that the judges of this new anti-corruption court will be selected through a transparent procedure and will be selected on the basis of their merit. She welcomed the adoption of the law on national security. She stressed the importance of parliamentary scrutiny on the security sector's reform and the reform of the security service of Ukraine. She stressed the need to ensure a proper staffing and functioning of the State Bureau of Investigation. She welcomes the efforts made so far to reform the police and stressed the need to continue the reform of community policing, criminal investigation and public order. On integrated border management, she highlighted the need for Ukraine to continue to align to the EU framework. On the Commission side, the representative of the Commission acknowledged the steps taken to launch the electronic asset declaration system with publicly available declaration. He insisted on the need to remove the obligation to file asset declaration for anti-corruption activists. He welcomed the work of NABU. He expressed concern for the latest developments affecting the leadership of SAPO. He stressed the need for the reform of the Public Prosecutor Office. On the economic side, the High Representative commending Ukraine's successful macroeconomic stabilization. She called on Ukraine to redouble efforts on asset recovery in state-owned banks, first and foremost private bank. She encouraged strengthening the supervision of the non-banking sector. On energy, I have already basically said what was said regarding the need to work on the structural reform of the public service obligation in the gas sector and the lack of transparency in the gas retail sector. The Commission underlined as well the need for a comprehensive reform of the municipal district heating systems. The Commission's representative welcomes the continuation of the reform of the household and utility subsidy system, which includes the monetization of subsidies at utility level. The Commission representative stressed the fact that delays continue to occur in adopting key reform laws in the main transport sectors to comply with international obligation and the association agreement. He stressed that there is a need to improve interconnectivity and develop better and safer transport links between the EU and Ukraine. Regarding privatization, the Commission representative stressed the need to finalize and implement the framework for privatization in a transparent process, reflecting international best practices, in order for Ukraine to be able to attract foreign investors. On trade matters, the EU side urged Ukraine to speed up regulatory approximation to the EU legal framework. In areas where we have noticed delays, such as customs, intellectual property rights, protection of IPRs, protection of geographical indication. The Commission called on Ukraine to fully implement its existing commitments under the association agreement in the area of telecommunication services. The Commission stressed the need as well to modernize and enhance border crossing and customs facilities. The Commission encouraged Ukraine to improve the business and investment climate. The Commission called on Ukraine to agree on EU-Ukraine harmonized veterinary certificates and to recognize animal disease regionalization, ensuring trade increase in plants, animals and their products. The Commission urged Ukraine to eliminate trade irritants as soon as possible, such as wood export ban. These are the main points that the High Representative and the Commissioners stressed during this Association Council.
Дякую, пане посол. Ми тут всі мали змогу
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. As if we witnessed this meeting, thanks to you. Thank you for the sharing with us key messages of the European Union. Thank you for those details. Now, I move to another representative of the Ukrainian government, Olga Stefanishina, the General Director of the Government's Office of Coordination of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration. Olga, a couple of days ago there was your publication that this meeting of the Association Council? Is it a victory, or will it help us to reach this victory further on? Thank you, Zariana. Now I will not stop on the details because both Ms. Ambassador and Ms. Ivana has mentioned them already. Just a couple of key points. You are all aware that during the year Ukraine has shared lots of roadmaps and position papers about the opportunity to deepen the cooperation in 4 sectors and the new agenda on cooperation in justice, freedom and security, energy, civil, digital markets, more deep integration in the internal markets of energy and gas, and the roadmap for Ukraine to join to the European Convention on the Joint Transit System. We have shared the positions, and the position of Ukraine was once again voiced out to the EU through the position paper, along with our vision of how we should move forward next year. As to whether it's victory or failure over the course of this current year, well, it's mixed feelings actually, because last year ago we had great expectations from this session of the Association Council. We expected that there will be at least 5 decisions on the integration to 5 spheres and transfer to new formats, but after we spent the whole year in bilateral negotiations with the EU as well as bilateral consultations at the government level, I can tell you that I'm very satisfied with these results, because the European integration experts recently claimed that we also need to learn how to read the wording of the association agreement, and it's a two-way highway. We learned how to read the agreement on partnership and cooperation. We have lengthy experience of implementing that agreement, so this partnership and cooperation commitments under the association agreement we perform beautifully, but association agreement is a more ambitious document than just that. It also introduces the functioning free trade zone, and in terms of the commitments for Ukraine, it's no less than offered to those countries that became members of the EU already or have such plans and ambitions. So I'm satisfied with the results because we started to read and understand the agreement together. Now I clearly understand that this will not be delivered in 1 year's time, because to clearly understand and apply the agreement is very important. Let me focus on some of the issues that were very important for us at this meeting. First of all, we started talking about the joint monitoring on the implementation of the association agreement, as was stated by High Representative on the external policy matters. We conducted this dialogue on the level of the EU delegation, not for 1 month. We prepared comparison tables on the laws that we implemented. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of our internal work, but there was no consensus achieved. But it was important at the Association Council, from one of the highest representatives of the EU hierarchy, that we reach the stage when we can measure the efficiency of implementing the agreement only in bilateral format. I believe this is a good result of the negotiations on updating Annex 27 in particular, where we introduced this joint monitoring procedure and the discussion on deepening the cooperation in the digital sphere, because in Ukraine, in the EU, we have the understanding we cannot start this process unless we evaluate the existing progress and independently done by the European Commission. Without that, we cannot formulate the plan of joint effort. So we had a couple of tracks that allowed us to come up with a final statement and something that allows us to prioritize our work for the upcoming year. Also, it was very important, and this has been reflected in the joint press release based on the results of the meeting of the Association Council, namely that the European Commission acknowledges the exclusive role of the government in monitoring of the coordination efforts to implement the association agreement.
Також є для нас позитивним індикатором, а так
For us, this is a positive indicator and shows what's the role of the government in the coordination of efforts with the parliament, namely the joint parliamentary governmental roadmap in implementing association agreements. It seems that we still have lots of laws to pass, but this year 20 euro-integration laws that have been passed, which is a great number indeed, but unfortunately these are not the laws that have been delayed in the parliament for the longest time. So in the first half of 2019 we would like to shape what's called heavy package of euro integration laws and pass it through parliament in spring this year. So recognition of the role of the government was very important for us because this is the highest session of the council with involvement of the government who heard this. Also, after publication of the agreements on Brexit, the rhetoric on the ability to sign the agreement on joint aviation space. Well, the first draft that we had to publish together, there was no such wording, but the proposal of Ukraine was taken into account, and now you can see that in the joint communique there is a statement that there is the desire of both parts to sign such agreement on joint aviation space as soon as possible. We're also grateful to the European Commission for the quick reaction and criticism of the Russian aggression in the Azov and Black Seas, and in this regard the Ukrainian government presidential team was instrumental, which prepared lots of documents and arguments supporting this quick reaction. I'm grateful to a very clear message that the EU made to this aggression. But obviously we're all in favor of deep and sectoral cooperation as part of the association agreement. This is a format of sectoral membership, as we call it in our process of European integration. Well, here are the representatives of those line ministries, sectoral ministries, who can tell more about their own blocks. But for me, the key disappointment is that we haven't reached the final decisions of the Association Council. But the big advantage now is that we help to identify key priorities in terms of sectoral cooperation at the level of both European and Ukrainian bureaucracy. There is desire to move forward and find jointly acceptable solutions which would allow us to ensure that this process is irrevocable and that this association agreement is fully operational and that meets our ambitions, on the other hand. It will take not one day, not 1 month to deliver, obviously, but the fact that this year of dialogue allowed the EU to consider to meet Ukraine halfway, and that we are ready to work on the association agreement together, and that we're moving away from the partnership and cooperation formats and towards association formats. It's great. We have reached agreements on each of the blocks. On energy, as you know, we update Annex 27, which will include not only the list of the EU key acts that have to be implemented, namely on gas, electricity, nuclear energy efficiency, but also it stipulates the mechanism of evaluation and monitoring of the progress of approximation of Ukrainian legislation. What's more important for Ukraine is preparation of joint decisions and recommendations of the Association Council based on the annual results of meeting the previous commitments, which means that it's a commitment for both counterparts, and when Ukraine prepares its homework, it can expect that it will be evaluated, will get clear recommendations that will be kept in clear frames as to what we need to do. It's important for us now, including in terms of integration to digital markets. This year we shared our roadmap, which is covered by Annex 17, if I'm not mistaken, to the association agreement. The European Commission is in the middle of assessment of this document, but DigiConnect's mission will come to Ukraine soon to evaluate the institutional and legal framework of Ukraine, and as Taras Kachka likes to claim, we are moving towards a digital visa-free regime, because finally we'll get clear recommendations, because so far we've been unilaterally evaluating ourselves, but hopefully we will ensure a positive bilateral assessment as well. But this will require to have joint points of view and joint action plans. So hopefully in the first half of 2019 we'll have the plan of digital liberalization. The same is true on customs. The association agreement is very supplementary because it allows Ukraine to join the joint transit regime format. And when I talk about this block, I always state that correct planning and understanding of commitments allows to reach strategic priorities. When on October the 20th the government plan on implementing association agreement was published, in the sphere of customs compared to the previous documents, we have 5 or 6 times more tasks in terms of implementation of this convention, and it became clear to all of us that this is a much more broad process than just introducing changes to the customs code. And hopefully Mr. Sergey will talk about the comprehensive framework draft law on joining the gas transit system, and together with the authorized economic operators draft law, both of them will be approved early 2019, and here the EU will be proactively involved in helping us to change the customs policy. But here we have lots of homework to do, and it's up to us to demonstrate the existence of the political will. But at the level of the European bureaucracy, I'm convinced as soon as we pass those laws, we'll start moving more seriously in terms of joining this convention, or at least to start seriously acknowledging the roadmaps that we prepare. But the most successful case for us is the new agenda on the justice, freedom and security. Lilia will tell more about this. We had lots of discussions on this. We wanted that all of the Ukrainian documents that were supported by the EU would be included into the joint communique in terms of the list of joint efforts and initiatives. But all the proposals of Ukraine, except for the initiative of Ukraine to meet the Lugano Convention on court rulings, they have been approved, except for this one. So in all our proposals in justice, freedom and security sphere were supported, and we can start moving forward there. So these are the results. unfortunately, that the decision hasn't been made, but there was a large-scale statement that was made at the end, and I cannot see the representative of the Ministry of Economy here on signing the ACCA agreements. I agree with Ms. Ivana. Ukraine has did lots of homework in this regard, but it's important that the Ministry of Economy will treat the agreements on conformity assessment and acceptance of industrial products as its priority. ACCA is not a simple agreement indeed. We still need to earn it, so we'll work more with the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, but during the Association Council agreement, we've been discussing and arguing about the ACCA commitment wording. We're not satisfied it, but at least it's the only one that points out and names black and white the ACCA agreement, which is extremely important for us. By the way, in the heavy package of laws that will lobby through the Parliament next year, one of them is on the controls of the security of non-food products, which is a key importance law to finalize horizontal reform in this sphere. So we'll be proactive early this year to involve the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, but I know that today Ms. Ivana will conduct bilateral meeting with Commissioner Binkovska, where she will raise this issue separately, which is one of the highest priorities for us, where we can achieve success next year. I promise I'll be brief, but not. Yeah, 3 people presented their speeches in 1 hour, and now we have 1 hour for 8 people. But please stay succinct and brief, Mr. Kachka. So, Taras is currently the advisor on strategic issues of the Renaissance Foundation. Also, he is the advisor to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. He was instrumental in discussing the wording of the association agreement, and he is still involved on discussing strategic matters of implementing this agreement. So, Taras, what's your take on the achievements so far and where we need to move faster and deeper in the future? Well, I'll try to do it brief, but unfortunately it's tough to do because we're talking about such a huge number of issues. Well, actually, I made a couple of both public and mass media statements that I'm quite skeptical about so-called successes that we have achieved so far, because in absolute terms, from the history of previous relations with the EU, we probably have one of the best periods, especially in the sphere of security, because EU combines efforts of 28 member countries, and their support is extremely important from the security standpoint for this country. It's great that the EU supports us in security. Also, macroeconomic support, technical assistance, everything is super in this regard. But when we start talking about real serious integration, then, as of today, we don't have a single area where we can claim that the Ukrainian ambition for economic integration has been fully implemented. Well, let's look at in the context that this is not the first but the 5th meeting of the Association Council. And all the positive agreements would be treated as positive for the first meeting, but this is the 5th one. And we're only one step away from agreeing on ACCA agreement. And, well, it makes not only me skeptical, but the society at large. When people start saying that, well, you're basically stalling, guys. Why cannot you pass all the needed legislative changes on technical regulations, something that we drafted in 2014 and 15, and it seems that we're moving forward, but the results are still on the horizon. Another not very pleasant situation is this. The EU strongly avoids a joint responsibility in meeting the commitments of the association agreement. But obviously this concept of homework dominates, and we're all in favor of this because this is the homework for Ukraine to deliver, obviously. And what Ola said, that unfortunately we still haven't reached the decision that we expected, but okay, we haven't received the final ultimate decision on any of the proposals. Even the progress on energy sector with updating and the annex had been an uphill battle, actually. It was difficult to convince the EU that we can move forward jointly there. Now, as to the stress from the EU that it's the Ukrainian ambition on the digital market, it's the Ukrainian ambitions on the justice, freedom and security. Well, this position we need to overcome. We cannot say that we lack cooperation and joint efforts, especially on technical regulations and customs, but when we start talking about things that are important for the general population of Ukraine, like we have a joint plan on energy, we have joint plan on digital markets, well, that's where we have gaps. Plus, very illustrative are the difference in how the society, how the government and how the EU differently treats the situation with the intellectual property legislation. Earlier this year, we claimed that there is a huge problem with the organization of collective management. Then the law has been passed because there were lots of boasts from the government. Oh, great, we proved it is important for euro-integration, with lots of explanation why it's in best interest of Ukraine to pass those laws. It's needed from the standpoint of association agreement. The president, when he signed it, he said that everything is super duper, but then we hear the evaluation of the EU that Ukraine has delays in passing the intellectual property legislation, proper legislation. So it's either EU overly skeptic or Ukraine is overly optimistic, one or another. And the last element where we are losing, not even losing a bit, but losing a lot, is that both sides lack a clear vision how to use integration instruments to finalize the reforms, that's ongoing reforms, and how to ensure irrevocable nature of those reforms. Well, I don't want to talk about energy, lots being said, but let me tell you about Lugano Convention. Quite illustrative example. The EU has supported Ukraine a lot in our justice reform, and you can treat differently the results of the reforms in the judicial system, but the potential of Ukraine joining Lugano Convention would be the best indicator that we successfully finalize those reforms. When Ukraine will honestly be invited to Lugano Convention, that means that judicial systems of the European Union trust the Ukrainian judicial system. And by the way, the internal European judicial discussion in respect of Poland, for instance, caused the implementation of Brussels protocol, which is then offered in Lugano Convention as the mechanism of the choice of jurisdiction. So although issues about the independence of Polish judiciary caused the courts of other EU members would ask too many questions or even refuse to cooperate with the Polish courts. So Lugano Convention is the best indicator whether they trust or distrust our judicial system. If we exclude consciously or subconsciously Lugano Convention as the instrument of integration, well, then it says that there are doubts about the efficiency of the judicial reform. On the other hand, there are certain positive changes that have been made. But until we jointly start talking about integration in any sector, energy, customs, digital market, we would still keep living in a semi-automatic, autonomous format. The law on authorized economic operators had been delayed for so long. Bills after bills were submitted for the review of the parliament, but it's not been approved because nobody sees the future of this idea. Why don't they see the future in this idea? Because the EU never committed that this will help to simplify customs procedures in the trade between Ukraine and EU. The Ukrainian experts claim it will happen, but the EU constantly avoids making the same statement. So by and large, 2018 was the year that helped us to approach the understanding that there's lots of things that jointly we need to do in order to the economic integration mechanism to be full-fledged and working. We're too far away from this, unfortunately, and we can only try to read between the lines of press release, but so far, out of 4 areas that the President claimed are priorities, we moved slightly in energy sector. We reached joint understanding on digital markets as well, but everything else is lagging. And we can claim that we respect each other and we support each other, but the level of disillusionment of the society in the association agreement will keep growing.
Дякую, Тарасе. Трошки так опустив.
Thank you, Taras, even though it was a too pessimistic statement. Yeah, Taras, I made some notes and I'll take less than 3 minutes based on what I took notes from you. So the fifth meeting of the Association Council, and you said if it's first session, then such decisions would be treated as success. But let me remind you that in 2014, there was not a single institutional capability, there was no action plan, there was no understanding how to implement the association agreement, there were no deputy ministries on euro-integration, so not on the second, third or fourth meetings we could reach this agreement. Only last year we have the realistic action plan that has been written in compliance with the association agreement, not just a generic action plan. We have government/parliamentary roadmap, we have priority sectors of integration. So yeah, it's not a huge victory, but it's a victory over ourselves to ensure that the changes that have happened are just only the beginning and that there will be further large-scale reforms and changes coming. Obviously, I would be beside myself with joy if after the first meeting of the Association Council we will reach the same level of understanding how to jointly use the instruments offered by the association agreement. But we are where we are, so and in terms of intellectual property sphere, the press release, and we haven't discussed it in any other format, that we are lagging behind or delaying, we just claimed that the focus of the free economic zone would be on intellectual property rights. And when the EU raises the IPR separately, they mean the protection of IPRs at customs. And we have the relevant draft law in the parliament, but obviously it doesn't cover the whole scope of commitments and obligations that we have in this sphere. Thank you, Olga. And now I pass the floor to Mr. Dmitro Shulga, who is the Director of the European program of the International Renaissance Foundation and the manager of the Civil Synergy project, and he's the author of this blue book that you have in your hands, Integration in the Framework of Association, the dynamic of implementing the agreement between Ukraine and EU with a focus on sectoral integration and priority spheres. So I would ask Dmytro to very briefly present this document and its key conclusions. Thank you. I'll try to be brief, especially since my colleagues will be able to share greater details on particular points from this publication. But the idea behind this publication appeared long before the Association Council meeting happened, but it's great that lots of the details of the discussions of the Association Council during the discussion itself raised all those issues, and they coincide a lot, those discussions, with the conclusions from our publication. Hopefully it would be useful to both parties, the EU and Ukraine, to find some common grounds for further discussions. The idea appeared a long time ago, and after we received visa-free regime, the discussion started. How do we want to see the future changes in the cooperation between Ukraine and the EU, raising customs issues, of course. The EU claimed that, first of all, you need to meet the commitments of the association agreement first. So the idea of this publication is to reflect the dynamics of implementing the association agreement. That's the beauty of the agreement. It's not static. It contains provisions that allow to change its content as a result of the evolution of economic acquis, also in terms of deep and comprehensive trade area, and in terms of number of sectors where Ukraine can obtain access to internal EU markets under the condition that it adaptates its legislation to the European acquis. So what we did, we came up with a catalog of all those dynamic revisions of the association agreement. This catalog is presented on page 11 of this publication, where we listed those spheres that are covered by those dynamic provisions, where the access to the internal markets of EU could be open to Ukraine, what would be the mode in which this access might happen as provided by the association agreement. And then we looked what is the duration to perform the homework for Ukraine as stated in relevant annexes to obtain such access to internal markets. Well, the association agreement doesn't state the deadline by which or the duration when the EU should provide its access, but it clearly states how long it will take for Ukraine to perform its homework. And after that, we moved along a number of sectors, but we didn't cover transport, we didn't cover the postal services, but for the majority of others, we did analyze in great details, which my colleagues will share with you, and we looked at those matters not only from the legal standpoint, we also looked at the economic components. What domestic markets Ukraine already has, what are the players there, what economic impact the integration to relevant EU internal markets will pose to them. And our conclusions are quite clear. When you can see that the deep and comprehensive free trade area provisions have come into force from January 1st, 2016, and by that time one might expect that Ukraine will gain access to the internal markets of EU, but so far only in public government procurements where we achieved such access. And it's happened not within the association agreement, by the way, but as part of our World Trade Organization negotiations. In 3 other areas we haven't reached such progress. First of all, because of the delays from Ukraine, especially adaptation of legislation in the parliament, and our experts state that the biggest reason for that is lack of large-scale comprehensive strategy, and that there is no separate government institution that will be responsible for this joint effort. Another area, and Petro will tell some more about it, about ACCA agreement, where we believe the ball is in the EU field because Ukraine had did all it could in terms of this agreement on conformity assessment and acceptance of industrial products. As to updates of annexes, it's true, sometimes European acquis have changed so much that sometimes we even have to reconsider the goal of integration, especially financial markets. Probably Veronika will talk about this. And finally, recommendations. Recommendations on each sphere are very detailed indeed in our publication, but I will make only 3 key statements. Obviously, next year, the top economic policy and security priority will be integration of energy market, because the contract with Gazprom is no longer valid by the end of next year, so integration to the EU energy market will help to change this reality for the better. Second general recommendation, we need to identify the list of priorities, finally, especially since we reached the preliminary understanding of both sides, and hopefully we'll manage to reach substantial success in terms of integration and as a result of doing homework by Ukraine and Europe opening its internal markets. Deadline late 2020, because January 1st, 1921 will be the end of 5 years of deep and comprehensive free trade area, and by that time, as association agreement says, there should be a revision of what's been achieved and what results delivered. And finally, thirdly, political aspects. Economy is economy, but politics are still the priority. And we plan here for Ukraine to make an official request for EU to evaluate the anti-corruption efforts and the judicial system, anti-corruption report and court reform laws. In terms of Western Balkan countries, they do it already. How to make the discussion between both sides deeper and of a high results level. Thank you. Thank you, Dmytro. Lots to read. I will only give you 5 minutes for each to talk in bullets about the priorities. And we'll start with the representative, well, Deputy Director of the Department of Customs Policy in the SFS of Ukraine, Mr. Sergei Bedesh. Your topic has been raised a couple of times already. Is there any future? What are the successes? Are they moderate or not? Thank you. Well, responding to your question about the perspectives of the success of implementing commitments under the association agreement and joining the Joint Transit Convention. Well, first of all, I've seen 3 examples of translation of this convention with even different translation of the name of the convention itself. Now we have finally the officially approved translation. We finally understand what it's all about. The draft law that the government submitted to the parliament at the time when the association agreement was reviewed there hasn't been passed by the parliament yet. And the MPs suggested to introduce relevant changes to the law that was passed on the September the 5th, and now we have legal grounds to use asset declarations as outlined in the convention to create a database as requested by the convention. As for the homework, we need to deliver now homework first, introducing declarations, having IT support for it, and then at least 1 year until the positive, to have the positive evaluation of the European experts that we have 1 year experience of using it. So here we have quite good potential indeed. After passing the law 2530 on single window operation, would allow us to start using needed declarations, and there is an agreement with the EU to gain their support in implementing the technical components of the Convention on Joint Transit. Unfortunately, I am not aware of the reasons why the Parliament delays on passing draft laws that are under their review. On authorized economic operators. Second draft law on promoting the customs services protection of intellectual property rights. Well, the Ministry of Finance is finally involved. We conduct consultations with the European Union experts, and we are ready to introduce the position of the European experts through the Customs and Tax Line Committee of the Parliament. another draft law on implementation on not paying customs duty, having 22 euros as the customs duty for the products that you bring in your baggage when crossing the border. Well, that's briefly what's been done. Well, a couple of words about the customs code. There are lots of tasks. The implementation plan suggests that more than 100 draft laws need to be drafted that will introduce changes to the customs code. To streamline this work, and we agreed it with the Customs Committee of the Parliament, we'll prepare one draft law on introducing changes to the customs code. Including as a chapter the draft law on the authorized economic operators, another chapter changes on the protection of intellectual property rights. Been passed. Well, you remember when our customs code, we passed it back in 2012. European experts claimed that it's 99% compliance with the EU, but all the recent keys and the changes to them will require further analysis. As well, probably I'll leave time for more questions. We'll ruin the sectoral logic now and we'll move to the justice, freedom and security sector. Yulia Zaychenko, General Director of the Directorate of Strategic Planning and European Integration of the Ministry of Justice. So, Ms. Yulia, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please. Mr. Ambassador, experts, colleagues, we heard a lot about this sphere a lot, but don't forget that block 3 in the association agreement doesn't have any annexes. There is no concrete list of acts that we need to implement, concrete lists of actions to perform. So there is no joint understanding of concrete steps that need to be made. But still, the plan for liberalization of visa regime has been made. 150 regulations, dozens of laws with a focus on our sector of justice, freedom and security. What have been done this year? Since it's difficult to coordinate all the efforts, just imagine how separate branches of power are involved in its implementation, starting with the judiciary, the work of the newly established bodies, like anti-corruption bodies that were not in place a couple of years back. We recognize that after the liberalization plan is over, we need a new road map. That's why we came up with a new justice, freedom and security agenda, which contains 6 chapters. We communicated it to the Association Council. In October, we shared it at the meeting of the European Commission, and as we heard from Mr. Ambassador, they are now ready to deepen cooperation in this area. And this new agenda becomes, for us, a milestone understanding of what steps, concrete steps we need to do to make, even though we don't have any annexes to the agreement on this sector. So we'll conduct additional consultations with the EU on this, but these 6 areas are personal data protection, political asylums, monitoring on implementation of liberalization reforms and post-monitoring of visa liberalization, financing terrorism and money laundering, cyber security, and the ability to meet potential threats during elections. So cyber security will meet cooperation with ANITA, the specialized agency of the EU, so there are possibilities to improve work. And finally, legal cooperation. So, brief bullets on EU Justice Scoreboard. Yeah, the European Union came up with the joint approach to monitor justice developments in each of the member countries. So what do we have now? The success of the agenda is obvious from the standpoint that Ukraine claimed that we want to introduce similar or introduce their own monitoring mechanism, and the EU responded that the Eastern Partnership countries will be evaluated in terms of the progress achieved in this sector, and there will be clear success indicators in justice sphere offered, which will outline how technical and legal cooperation, as even financial support will be given, and it will be provided for all Eastern Partnership countries. So this will be viewed as a partial instrument for joint monitoring with joint indicators, and it's the World Bank that will perform it. In the Eastern Partnership effort, we provided our comments, which particular indicators we would like to be monitored, and then the results of this monitoring would allow us to say how trustworthy is our judicial system. We can compare ourselves with other Eastern Partnership countries, and only then we can start realistically discussing the joining of Lugano Convention. By the way, Poland, it took 10 years for them to do that. Then Gaga Convention updates and Gaga project will happen in 2019, so we're discussing with the EU whether we can join the new instrument, because Lugano Convention is only one of the areas. Obviously, we are not stating that this is no longer our priority. It is, but the EU has a very well-balanced position on how to support this priority for us. First, allowing the World Bank to study the society's trust towards the judiciary of Ukraine, and then we'll identify very concrete steps what needs to be done. So the Ministry of Justice is very result-oriented. That's why we are ready for joint concrete initiatives with the EU, but we initiate it with our proposals and then expect their reaction to it. We provide data on our findings as well as research data from United Nations and other justice programs in Ukraine on what's being done in terms of attestation of courts. The EU Prava Justice Project states that the system meets with the European standards. On the anti-corruption court, the next year's budget has funding provided. There is an international oversight board created which will ensure transparent, objective, unbiased selection of judges, which the EU requires from us. So lots of concrete actions have been made in this sector, and the very fact that the European Union claimed at the Association Council that we are ready to work jointly on joint management of borders, on cyber security, well, this all suggests that we move in the right direction. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll gladly entertain them. Well, if we'll have time for that, yeah, for sure. So thank you, Ms. Julia. Thank you for this event. I'm always grateful to hear opinions of all peers and colleagues. Unfortunately, Ms. Julia needs to run now, but we have several experts now. Veronika Mowchan will be the first one. She works as an academic director from the Institute of Economic Research and Political Consultations. But please try to squeeze all your findings in just 5 minutes. Thank you. I'll try to be fast. I have only 2 basic bullets to share. The first statement is about ambitious goals of Ukraine, but not enough efforts to achieve those ambitions. Well, it's not true everywhere. In terms of economics, export to EU keeps increasing, and it increases with the speed twice bigger than export increases to other countries, which already demonstrates that the opportunities that we received in pro-European rhetorics and the large number of joint projects allows Ukrainian producers to come to the European markets to find their niches there. We can illustrate this with examples of export of oil, sunflower oil. Finally, Ukraine gained access and started using it actively. But actually, breakthroughs happen not only in agriculture, it happens also in other spheres as well. We can see that the new products have been launched at the European markets, produce from the SME, small and medium enterprises, no longer being a planned economy. Our entrepreneurs come up with some niche products that would be impossible in the olden times. So, creativity of Ukrainian business is much bigger than that creativity of the Ukrainian government officials, and it's great that it's happening. That's a positive statement. In order for the dynamic positive changes not to stall, to ensure that we don't happen the trend that was, you remember, early 2000s, Europe became our biggest partner, but then when we reached an invisible barrier, the volume of trade dropped substantially, and now it keeps growing again. So in order for it not to drop again, we need to deliver on veterinary, sanitary and phytosanitary norms. So far, we have used the findings that were delivered 10 years ago when we joined the World Trade Organization. Finally, Ukraine received access to the European public procurement market, but not through association agreement, but through World Trade Organization. So sometimes other mechanisms might be used, but it's better that we make good use of the instruments and mechanisms allowed by the association agreement itself. Yesterday's decision to break down state fiscal service into tax administration and customs will provide impetus for the reform of the customs as an independent agency. There is an interesting vision how we'll develop in the financial sector. an ambitious goal to combine financial markets, but a deeper research showed that we will face an interesting dilemma. The association agreement doesn't allow the European supervisory bodies over the financial sector to directly regulate the Ukrainian markets. So shall we introduce a special mechanism, or whether after the homework is done we'll face the brick wall, and then the next question would be what to do next? This annex should be updated completely. Over the last 10 years, the EU completely reconsidered the financial regulations acquis. Ukraine is doing the same because we need it, but in certain areas we need to reach healthy balance. Do we need it at all or not? Well, since I've used up all of my 5 minutes, so we do have some positive achievements for some businesses, but the pessimistic note is there is more to be done, both by the society and the government at large. Mr. Dmytro, they've noticed, they made statements today on numerous occasions about your ACCA agreement, so what inspiring speech we can hear from you? Well, thank you. I'm not sure that my speech will be inspiring, but it will be factual. The fact that it's being mentioned, this agreement, it's a feather in the hat of Ukraine. Well, let me try to explain why ACCA is an advantage for Ukraine. There are two types of trade barriers. Some fiscal, like quotas, tariffs, duties. And in terms of non-food products, such barriers have been zeroed. So now industrial products pay zero duty. But that doesn't mean that Ukrainian products can freely enter the European markets. There are also technical barriers, because those products should meet European requirements and comply with all the needed certifications, with certificates being issued by authorized European certificate bodies. So in terms of such technical barriers, the Ukrainian industrial products have no free access to the European Union. That's why the ACCA agreement is the one that is aimed to overcome such barriers. Today, a Ukrainian producer will have to pass two quality compliance procedures, but joining ACCA, it would allow the producer to perform this evaluation only once, either in Ukraine or in Europe, and then it could be freely sold either in Ukraine or in Europe. In order to join this beautiful agreement, Ukraine has to perform a number of actions. First of all, approximation of its horizontal legislation, that is to say, those laws that outline the functioning of metrology and standardization, compliance assessments, technical regulations. These are horizontal, covering various sectors, and also vertical or industry legislation, technical regulations on the quality standards to be compliant with the European directives and regulations. The second component Ukraine should introduce all the European standards in respective sectors, identical ones. Thirdly, Ukraine should have the relevant infrastructure, the certification labs that would be able to perform the European level tests. And finally, Ukraine has to get rid of duplicating technical requirements like on sanitary norms, labor safety, fire protection. When old requirements contradict the European ones. So these four sets of measures is what Ukraine needs to deliver. What's been done? So far, Ukraine has passed horizontal laws. 7 of them passed between 2010 and 2015. Well, the oldest one back in 2001, actually, but the changes have been introduced since then. And in Annex 3, in the association agreement, we have delivered on the first 5 points. On technical regulations, Ukraine is still going on. Electromagnetic compatibility, low voltage machines, we passed those 3, and about a dozen of other sectors were between 2014 and 2018, where Ukraine has to comply with the newest acquis of Europe. Also, Ukraine introduced the unprecedented for the former Soviet Union countries rule that we can accept compliance documents in the original language. Infrastructure is ready. Duplicating regimes are partially abolished. So, Ukraine has passed horizontal laws, identified priority spheres in technical regulation sphere, received opinions of the European experts. Lots of changes in there were introduced in 2018. So standards are there, infrastructure is there. What's next? Next, the ball is in the EU court. As so far, no hope in sight. We observe large problems with importers because the European requirements are very burdensome. Only under the ACA agreements it will be fast and efficient for the importers, but so far importers find themselves in very dire straits. But the association agreement does not require Ukraine to simplify procedures if it's not provided for in the EU. So this is small crevices, small gaps where water can flow in and rust might appear. Well, Dmytro, you're running out of time. Yeah, but it's very important to make this statement. I recognize that government has to make very diplomatic statements, but let me be very straightforward to you. You said Ministry of Economy should be more actively involved, but I don't understand what more they can do. They do whatever the laws provide them to do. Now the next answer is political one, and the answer to this question lies in Brussels. And in this sphere we have reached closest to the ability to move from political decision to practical, pragmatic agreements in practice. So this acknowledgement should happen both in Kiev and in Brussels. Without this, we will not move forward in this sphere, unfortunately, in the nearest future. That's why we concluded that the political discussions should be gradually transformed into practical ones. Thank you. Olena Pavlenko, DIXI Group, Energy. I'm wearing two hats here. I represent the Ukrainian side of the platform of civil society, Ukraine EU, so on behalf of the platform, we welcome the decisions of the Association Council. We will conduct the joint session next year, and we will invite the government and Mr. Ambassador to attend this session. We'll discuss two issues: the foodstuff safety and energy. A report that in April we will present. So back to energy. You talked about water and rust. Well, let's talk about gas some more. On monitoring the association agreement, what's happening right now is the meeting and press conference of monitoring of energy components of the association agreement in Crisis Media Center as we speak. So soon you'll read their press release. But let me talk to you about the year 2019, because at this other event they report about 2018. So 2019 will be a difficult one because of the elections, both in the EU and Ukraine. During elections there will be lots of manipulations and populism, especially in Ukraine, especially on energy. I would like to use this opportunity to address the Ukrainian journalists. Please get involved. Please do not allow populism and manipulations that will be made in respect of the association agreement, energy reforms. Well, let me give you one example. Not a single presidential candidate can guarantee the reduction of the gas price. This is not the competence of the president. This violates Ukrainian laws. So please, Ukrainian journalists, try to explain to your readers what's going on. Now, as to the priorities in cooperation between EU and Ukraine in gas sector, as Dmytro rightly stated, next year, end of next year, the contract with Gazprom on gas transit will come out of play. So we need to introduce new mechanism. There were a couple of different ideas. For instance, let's sign a new agreement, as the government said, but the Stockholm arbitration court clearly shows that signing a paper with Russia means nothing. So I'm grateful that in the Association Council press release, the separate statement was made about the integration of energy markets. This is a two-way highway. It takes two to tango. So we need to do our homework. We need to finalize unbundling the right way. And as the civil society, we will push on the government to make it happen. From the European friends, we need support in following up on this process with the European structures, involving international partners who would become a future partner of the Ukrainian energy sector, and support in not allowing alternative pipelines like Northern Pipeline 2, because it might be a separate signal to some people that that's the way to do it. Integration into the electricity market. Well, most likely we will not launch this market in July next year as we planned previously, but we should not drop our guard. On Thursday, tomorrow, the Parliament will vote for the law on renewable energy. Hopefully, in 2019, this law is passed fully and will start building normal electricity markets and will promote the use of clean sources of energy in Ukraine. Well, that's all for me. Hopefully I did it in 5 minutes. And Ірина Сушко, Executive Director, Europe Without Barriers on Justice, Freedom and Security. Well, I'll speak in bullets. Ms. Yulia Zaychenko has told us a lot about this sector, and she did outline the main priorities for the government for next year. And when I listened to her, I recognize that civil experts are in full support of those priorities. I would just like to add I believe that the transition period is over after the new visa regime was introduced. Hopefully, we managed to propose an integrated document that not only contains all the tasks that have to be performed under visa liberalization plan, but also we managed to update those tasks that previously were contained in the Justice, Freedom and Security Plan. It's important that the tasks we set become joint plans, not only initiatives from Ukraine, but I believe that finally we have 3 areas where we can clearly expect that there will be strong interest and desire to cooperate with the EU. First of all, it's an integrated management of border management concept, which has been updated already. Previously, this concept contains tasks to ensure more close cooperation of all the agencies that operate on the border. While the new concept paper also adds the need to fight those security threats that stem first and foremost from the aggressive actions of the Russian Federation. And this is exactly the sphere where the progress has been achieved so far. And we have a clear vision how to strengthen this potential. 4-level control system on the border, joint patrols, joint management, cooperation with law enforcement, etc. Another is migration policy. Ms. Julia Zaychenko today has mentioned already about the criteria that would be used to control and manage the migration flows. And finally, visa policy. Ukraine has made certain steps towards adaptation of Ukrainian visa policy to Schengen, and our organization, Europe Without Barriers, has some findings and ideas how to strengthen this work. But let me conclude by saying So far, the preliminary agreements have been reached. Перепрошую. Він пішов вже?
Не помиляюсь, так, засідання підкомітету по ЮСБ, або, ну, як мінімум називають цю дату, вийти вже з більш детальнішим таким справді планом заходів, який може містити цей новий порядок, бо загалом прекрасний, я вважаю, документ, але він надзвичайно поки що ще загальний і потребує не лише деталізації з точки зору того, як має виглядати план, з очікуваними результатами, з відповідальними там інституціями, але і з розумінням того, які переваги міститимуть ті чи інші завдання для обох сторін, для України і Європейського Союзу, саме для того, щоб знову ж таки ще більше посилити оту зацікавленість і залученість сторони ЄС в процес виконання завдань, як в рамках нового порядку, так і в рамках угоди про асоціацію. Дякую.
Дякую, Іро. Ми фактично вичерпали наш час і, на жаль, фактично не залишилося для дискусії, але, можливо, у когось ще є якісь фінальні репліки. Я розумію, що концентрат експертної думки тут був настільки високий, що це потрібно було розводити вдвічі-втричі, але я сподіваюся, що у нас буде нагода більш поглиблених дискусій. Оля, все-таки є бажання щось сказати.
От, власне, в мене немає коментарів, я просто хочу всім подякувати Зоряні, всім присутнім тут експертам за те, що ми можемо в такому вузькому колі людей, які розуміють, про що ми говоримо, обговорювати і результати, і планувати щось на майбутнє. Мені дуже приємно, і я вам вдячна всім за вашу експертизу і підтримку.
Ну, від свого боку також дякую Ользі і пану Мінгареллі, який вже пішов, і всім колегам, які тут були, за дійсно цікаві думки. Я сподіваюся, що для нас, для проекту «Громадська синергія», теж багато матеріалу для думок про пріоритети 2019 року. Сподіваюся, у ньому буде ще більше цікавих дискусій і більше часу для розмов. І результатів, звісно, євроінтеграційних так само.